satellites. Let's give them a bit of spectrum and allow them to use that. Then we come across the question, well, what does that mean? What is a nanosatellite? Well, we all know that nanosatellites are much smaller than regular satellites. Yes? No, they're not, because of deployables. You can get some quite large deployables now in small satellites. They have no propulsion. Again, not true. Quite a lot of 3U satellites now have propulsion. They don't have 3-axis stabilization. Again, not true. So it's very difficult. An argument that's often made is they transmit only with very low power. But actually, if you look at the power flux density in terms of the power per megahertz of bandwidth, it can be quite high. So again, there isn't an obvious way of telling the difference between a nanosatellite and a normal satellite. The one thing that we came up with is not knowing where you're going because you're a secondary payload. And we think there's a solution to that, which is to, and hopefully you have some idea that you're going to be geostationary or non-geostationary or lunar orbit or something like that. Hopefully you've got an idea about that. So with what Austria have done, specify maximum and minimum altitudes, use that to work out your link budget and that to make your application. The other thing I was going to mention is in terms of space debris. Space debris is a real issue, and in the UK we now require that spacecraft are disposed of at end of life, nominally 25 years after the end of life. To give you some idea, there are about 500,000 known objects in orbit at the moment. Around 20,000 of those are around the sort of size of a CubeSat, so there's a lot of stuff whizzing around. Typically in low Earth orbit, you might be doing 18, 19,000 miles an hour, something like that, kilometers per second. Lots of kilometers per second, rather. A small CubeSat hitting a big satellite is going to do a lot of damage. So, again, there's not really an issue there, but it's important to make sure that there's a disposal of space debris, and that's something we're looking at. Stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, in fact, if I was coming there from Planet Labs, you said that you love the FCC, and I had no problem with that. And then Mario said, although it's true, there are people which are coming to Ofcom, etc. And suddenly I was thinking that, well, nobody is frightened by the fact that there are two bodies in the UK which are dealing with small sat. Hopefully you're talking together and coming to some approach. But thank you very much for those explanations, please.
Okay, I'm Jordi Puchuari from CalPoly, one of the people who started CubeSats, and I've been working on it ever since. And one of the things that I'm from the US, but I want to kind of put since we already had Planet Labs telling everybody how much we love the FCC, I want to bring the universities as a general group of people that may not have the resources that a private company has, both in financial resources, but also in a standard mindset of regulatory following the rules and putting paperwork out and doing those kinds of things. And it's also a problem that's even more pronounced when you have new countries coming into the space business where they may not even have a regulatory agency that deals with space objects, and we've seen that happen in the past. One of the things that I want to point out that has been very positive, and that I think it's something we need to all kind of talk about, and I think it's great that Attila has put something together where we can all come together and talk about regulation between regulators and regulees. Is that the word for that? Because we need to work together to make this work. But one of the things that we've seen in the US, a lot of the paperwork, filing, and license processes are being handled by the launch integrators. NASA is sponsoring a number of launches for universities, and as part of that sponsorship, and CalPoly has been working with them, we provide everybody with a sample FCC licensing paperwork. They're all going to be using the ham radio because they're all universities that are doing amateur work, so we have a standard piece of paper that's very easy for them to prepare. And I think that's one of the things we've seen happen with a number of regulatory agencies. NOAA has done the same thing for imaging requirements in the US, where for universities they have a new form that it's a lot simpler and it's much easier to use. One of the things that I want to point out for the developers that you guys need to understand is that the numbers of satellites that are being produced in the nano range are not the normal numbers of spacecraft that the regulators have seen in the past. So that's the other side of the equation, where we're overwhelming the regulatory system, and that's why it's in everybody's interest to simplify the system. And I think the processes are moving in that direction, but it's going to take some work back and forth. But I wanted to make sure that I pointed out that there's a lot of people developing satellites right now in the CubeSat, nanosat range that have very little experience with regulation. They may not even have an organization in the country that can help them effectively go through that process. And that's an educational process we have to all embrace and kind of help everybody get up to speed. The law is the law. I agree. We all have to follow it, but we need to make it as easy as possible as a team.
Thank you very much for your message. Yes, well, I've said law is a law, but should not be there to prevent those developments.
Of course.
And I think that I really like whatever you said about this approach in the amateur bands, particularly with the university, etc. Because I really think that the future of whatever commercial system in those non-GSO, are those as bigger non-GSO as those as GSO, are coming from students, alumni that today, in a way, are working on some of those projects. And these ideas of tomorrow will be there. And so I really think it's important. I agree with you also that, well, we don't have to frighten anybody to come and say, well, I have 100 satellites to launch. And then people said, well, paperwork for ITU, but it's quite impossible. It seems to me like, I don't know, it seems to me a problem which has nothing to say with those small sat. I think it's called a typical Earth stations in some dance. How do you notify millions of TV aero stations? Please don't ask me. So, having said that, getting out, yes, please, just a comment, and then we'll go there to finish. And just to mention also, there will be also an opportunity, 5-10 minutes, hopefully, after that you can ask any questions there to this audience. Please.
Thank you. I wanted to get to one point that you mentioned. You said the procedures, there is a lot of paperwork involved. The procedures might be too complicated. I guess probably, maybe you're right, maybe not. I don't have the answer now. I guess a very good starting point is to make use of the procedures as they are now, so that we can learn which are the limits of the procedure, and then we can intervene. But not following the regulatory procedures is, in my opinion, a mistake. I think regulations, and this is the way I personally think of all these regulatory stuff, I think regulations are there not for limiting the technology to go forward, but for helping the technology to move forward in a proper way. So if we follow the rules where they are, we can then learn from mistakes, and then we can optimize them to nanosatellites if this optimization can be achieved. I mean, these should be the starting point, and one of the main message I would like to bring back home from events like this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, going on this side, please.
Thanks. I will be brief regarding the time. I'm Alfred Visser from the Radio Agency Communications Netherlands. And I'm advisor in the field of space law and land mobile communications. Tanya already mentioned a lot of the situation in the Netherlands, so I won't echo her. So I will just add to her presentation that in the Netherlands we have nowadays 13 satellites under Dutch jurisdiction. There are 3 small satellites and 10 geostationary satellites. And to echo the words of my colleagues of the UK, I would like to advise the universities and the space operators, when you have plans, when you start with your plans, think about the missions, come also at that time to your regulator, your national regulator, because we see in practice that is a step that is done in a very, very final phase of the project, and then you have to deal with a lot of difficult situations also regarding the ITU issues, what we find in the Netherlands. Very important, because filing through the ITU you get international recognition, and that is for us in the Netherlands very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In fact, yes, one of the things I thought you have been helped because Tanya said a lot about what's going on. No, I think it's important. One issue is to be clear also, and what we found with the national regulator, generally speaking, is that there is also from any people that want to developer of systems or entrepreneurs, etc., there is always a little fear as soon as you get to the regulators that they will be talking about authorizations, license, and whenever you talk about authorization or license, it's like when suddenly you have to ask a questions and people say tax, bling, 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 and well, I would say, I don't want to say that it could be a fair message also from administration, but I think that it's true that what is to be clear is that at some stage, in a way, there is this international regulation, there is the approach of the national legislation, but also that at the national level it's quite clear about how to encourage, in fact, the developments of all of those space activities, and talking a little about those space activity for small sat, where there are more people to be involved, just to be fair with all of those companies, either from private company trying to get into the business, but also everything coming from academia and university. But okay, having said that, thanks. Last one before the questions.
Yes, thank you. My name is Pauli Huuhka. I'm from the Frequency Administration of Finland. And being in frequency administrations, we handle only those matters which concern about frequencies. So when we handle or plan licenses or make licenses, actually one is coming. So we don't take into account any debris in the space or objects in the space, fortunately or unfortunately. I don't know which way it is. So I think I may have some messages when I return back to home or to work. So we don't have any special law, as I mentioned, about those matters. And when we consider the request for license or to satellite to operate, so we go through the radio declaration procedure of these satellites exactly as it is. And when we write the license, it has those terms, limitations, parameter values, everything which has been notified to the ITU, and we try just to follow exactly the radio regulations. I have tomorrow presentation of the process itself, and I think we had some interesting, with capital I, in the beginning of the process. So you will learn a little bit more what happens when administration having just first step in the path going nowhere, which we don't see the end. So that's the point. So I just perhaps still mention about myself. So I have been doing administrative and coordination work on satellite networks. I've been on ITU work for on satellites for 25 years and on other matters 40 years. And I'm especially expertised in sharing studies, development of softwares which I have coded and so on. So I'm quite technical person, perhaps. I hope I might help someone with the interference programs during these days. So we have no limitations which kind of entity gets licenses, so commercial or not commercial, or what services or whatever. We just do the work. We do our work and we keep the radio regulations near us when doing that work. So the Finnish satellite, it will be the first Finnish satellite. It will be launched in 1 year's time, or perhaps a little bit shorter time, and it will operate on the radio amateur frequencies. So we have today heard quite a lot of what it means. But I have the pleasure